Welcome to Changing Higher Ed, a podcast dedicated to helping higher education leaders improve their institutions. With your host, Dr. Drumm McNaughton, CEO of The Change Leader, a consultancy that helps higher ed leaders holistically transform their institutions. Learn more at changinghighered.com. And now, here's your host, Drumm McNaughton.
Thank you, David. Our guest today is Mike Petrilli, president of the Thomas B. Fordham Institute. Mike is an expert in education policy. His creds include research fellow at Stanford University's Hoover Institution, executive editor of Education Next, and founder of the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Innovation and Improvement. Mike is also an award-winning writer, authoring multiple books and articles, and is a distinguished senior fellow for the Education Commission of the States. Mike joins us today to talk about his most recent article, The Upside of the Downward Trend in College Enrollment and its Implications on the Higher Education Industry. Mike, welcome to the show.
Hey, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. You have had an incredible background in both higher ed policy, and more importantly, K-12. And there's a lot of stuff going on. I just recently read your article, The Upside to the Downside for College Enrollment and its Implication on the Higher Education Industry. Incredible article, and I think you nailed so many points in it.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. I really am a K-12 policy guy, but I have always been interested, as we need to be, in that transition space, as kids come out of high school and figure out what they're going to do next. And I really think that is a point where we've got so many problems in both the K-12 system and in the higher ed system. So yeah, looking forward to talking about that.
Well, this would be great because you said higher ed does have some serious problems. I mean, student debt, the cost of education, the enrollment cliff coming, COVID, we've seen a drop of over 1 million students in 2 years. It could be the biggest drop in 50 years in higher ed. And frankly, I don't think many presidents, they're kind of grasping at straws. They're not really sure what to do.
Yeah. And look, and the conventional wisdom is, of course, that decline, that massive decline is bad. And in some respects it is. I want to be very clear from the beginning. Almost certainly that 1 million students, that includes many young people who could be very successful in higher education. It's a problem that they're not putting this time and energy into getting their degrees. Here's hoping that they come back. Our education system is good at providing second and third and fourth chances. But as you know, my argument is that a lot of that group of students, a lot of those 1 million kids, frankly, they would have dropped out anyways, because that's what the statistics, what the data have been showing us, is that we've got almost 1 million kids dropping out every single year as it is, even before the pandemic. And overwhelmingly, that was because they were students who were not prepared to succeed in higher education in the first place.
Well, when you say not prepared for success in higher ed, what do you mean?
Yeah. Well, look, this is, of course, a big controversy and has been for a long time, but we've got measures that you can get from the National Assessment of Educational Progress or the folks at SAT or ACT or other sources, where you can look at academic skills, even just the basic skills in reading, writing, and math, and say, okay, you need to be at this certain level in order to matriculate to college, not end up in a remedial course, and have a good chance of completing a degree or a credential within a certain amount of time. We can debate exactly where that line is. I think, the more evidence we have, the better. I think it's fair to say that college ready, it means something different depending on the college. But in general, I think we can also agree that there's a certain level below which kids are just not going to be able to succeed in doing college level work if they don't have the reading skills, they don't have the writing skills, they don't have the math skills. Not to talk about everything else that it takes to be a successful student, all the non-cognitive skills. And, the data that I have seen is that, again, pre-pandemic and for many, many years, we usually get about 35, maybe 40% of high school graduates to that college ready level by the end of the 12th grade. And keep in mind, that doesn't include the kids who drop out. And that's a smaller group than in the past, but still, that's a group. So in round numbers, maybe a third of kids go through the K-12 system in America and come out ready for higher education. And yet 2/3 go into higher education of some sort right away. As, they graduate in June, their senior year, and by August or September, they are enrolled in post-secondary education. 1/3 ready, 2/3 going. And so we should not be surprised that we've got this massive college dropout problem because half the kids are going into post-secondary education underprepared.
And of course, that old saying comes to bear that the highest cost of a college degree is the one that you don't get.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And, look, we talk all the time about the college wage premium, and we should. It's real, and it's gotten bigger over time. It's bigger in some fields than others. It's bigger in some places than others, but it's significant. But it's a college completion wage premium, right? There's no such thing as a drop out of college wage premium. At this point, most of the data says you basically get no benefit from having a few credits, but no credential and no degree. All you have at that point is debt and regret. And unfortunately, we're talking about, depending on how you count it, 40, 50% of the kids who try college who fail to get a degree or a credential. And so, I'm not convinced that those kids are better off having gone through the experience of giving it the college try than had they not.
Boy, we're going to have to throw that saying, give it the good old college try. We're going to have to throw that one out the window, aren't we?
Yeah, I would vote yes. Yeah.
With that, colleges, a lot of folks are showing up. They're not ready for college. And then, what I see is most institutions expect, and especially faculty, and of course, I'm a former faculty member. I don't want to, really get my colleagues upset at me. But, faculty expect them that they're going to be able to fit in a certain mold, that they're going to be college ready, they're going to be able to do all these things, and they can't. And faculty don't, and most institutions don't know what to do with them.
Yeah. No, that's right. And of course, this is a much bigger problem at some institutions than others. I mean, this is not an issue at the Ivy League schools or the highly selective schools by and large, but at some of the four-year universities and certainly many, many of our community colleges, it is a big issue. And, look, on the one hand, I appreciate the challenges, and I know a lot of places are working at trying to figure out ways to support students. There's some promising models out there, the CUNY programs and others to try to reimagine remedial education, help kids get where they need to be. But I think the fundamental issue is that colleges know they are admitting kids who are nowhere near ready for college. I mean, I'm talking about students who are reading at the 5th or 6th or 7th or 8th grade level, and likewise with their math and writing skills. And, we have accepted that community colleges in particular will accept students like that because they say, well, we have an open access mission. I don't think that's good enough. If we live in a world where we think a lot about probabilities, a kid with a 6th grade education, basically, the probability of them succeeding in a community college is very close to zero. So I don't think those colleges are doing anyone a favor by admitting kids like that, taking their money, even maybe it's not their money, it's a Pell Grant or it's other grants and loans, and enrolling them. I think that we need to have admission standards at every institution of higher education because we've got this situation where there's just too many kids who are being admitted to college who have almost no chance of success because of their academic underpreparation.
Mm-hmm. So what can these colleges do to help with that? More remedial courses, different kinds of enrollment. These folks are out there. The education is, for most of them, the ticket to a better life.
Well, but again, if they are able to complete, right?
Yes.
It is only a ticket if they're able to complete. So I think we have to have a much more honest conversation. I think people, somebody's got to be willing to tell a young person, and I'm focused mostly on thinking about young people. I know there's a whole other set of people who, are older and workers coming back. But let's talk about, 18-year-olds. Nobody in the K-12 system is willing to tell those 18-year-olds that, college may not be a good option for you because of where your reading, writing, and math skills are. And the higher ed institutions aren't willing to tell them that. And they only figure that out by failing. And imagine you're 18, 19, 20 years old. You've always struggled with school. You've never necessarily liked it, but everybody tells you to go to college. And now you have failed again. And you've burned up money and you've taken out loans. You've taken out time. And the question is, could those kids have been doing something better with their time? And I think in many cases, going to work, getting a job, even if it's not a great job to begin with, is another form of higher education. You do the job, you get better at it. Over time, you get some raises, you get promoted, you have now some skills you can take somewhere else. And step by step by step, you start to have more opportunities. And then maybe at a later point, you're in a better position to benefit from formal higher education. But I just think these colleges are kidding themselves if they think that they are always the best option for every single young person. I just think that the empirical evidence is clear that that is not true.
Well, we certainly had that message coming out of the Trump administration that college isn't for everyone.
Yeah.
But that's really the first time from a policy perspective it's actually come out.
Yeah. No, that's right. I mean, look, we have had for a long time this college for all mentality. And, this pendulum has swung and people are now saying, well, of course, we don't mean that everybody has to go to Harvard. And we know these career and technical programs are important and let's get more kids into the trades. That's great. And we need more of that. And I do think that's part of the answer is that for community colleges, for example, to do a better job of helping students assess their skills and their strengths and their aptitudes and their interests and steer them into some directions where they're going to be successful. They are nervous to do that because of the old tracking system, which was a terrible system that was racist, that was classist. But then we swing to this other extreme where we don't do any of that, and we're not willing to tell a young person, look, just based on your academic record, the chances of you succeeding in that, economics program are not great. You can give it a try anyways, by all means. But look, your scores, your grades, it doesn't look pretty.
Yeah. Well, parents are not going to want to hear that about their Sally or their Johnny either.
Yeah, no, that can be an issue for sure. But I think that there's a lot of parents. I mean, the polling on this, parents are not saying they want college for all. There's a huge amount of support for career and technical programs. Parents tend to be very practical. They want their young people successfully launched. More than anything to them, that means employed. So they're on the track to a good job and a good life. Of course, we also need to make sure that kids are ready to be citizens and to be part of our democracy. But parents, they tend to be very pragmatic, more so than I think those of us in the education field. And keep in mind, most parents out there do not have a college degree themselves. We're up to north of 40% for young people now with college degrees. But, in the country as a whole, it's still down by maybe 1 in 3 people that have a college degree. Among parents, maybe a tad bit higher. But, that means the vast majority of parents don't have 4-year degrees themselves. The message has got to be higher education is a great option for many kids, not all kids, but it also depends. You got to make good choices about which higher education. How much does it cost? What's the return on investment? And for this individual student, can we match them, their strengths, their attributes, their interests with a program that makes sense for them?
Yeah. Do we need to reorganize, refocus community colleges to be more career-oriented rather than a low-cost way to get your AA degree and move on to a 4-year degree?
Yeah, we may. I mean, again, let me be careful here because I don't want to claim that I am an expert on the higher ed scene. I think it is a fair question about when those community colleges were born, when we kind of, in many places, combined the junior colleges and the old technical colleges, whether that's created more problems maybe than it solved. And it'd be interesting when you dig in some places that still have what we call technical colleges. They certainly seem to be doing a very good job connecting with the workforce and with employer needs and helping young people plug into that. Look, I have no problem with people going to a community college for the first 2 years, much more affordable, get your basics under your belt and move on to a 4-year university or a flagship. That's great. But that only works, again, if you have the academic skills to succeed. And I know I keep banging on this, but we just have to face the facts that, we're talking about 40% 40% of high school graduates that are at that level. You talk about kids who maybe are close. Okay, maybe that's another 10 or 20%. All right, but that means, we're talking about maybe, 40% of kids out there who are nowhere near ready to read a college textbook or to write a college paper or to do college-ready level math. And unfortunately, what we see in the data is it's really hard to help most people make a lot of progress once they are approaching adulthood. We got to fight and win that war when they're 5, 6, 7 years old. Which is, again, why I'm passionate about education reform, that we need to do a dramatically better job in the early years. That's when we have a real chance of changing these trajectories. But, as time goes on, the clock is ticking, it gets harder and harder. And, you never want to say that it's impossible. It's not. And you find amazing schools and amazing universities that are getting great results. But we also need to be realistic about what the prospects are for most kids.
Well, I can certainly understand that. It is challenging for many kids when they get to college. I remember for me, I was pretty close in high school, pretty close to straight A. But then when I got to the Naval Academy, and it was like, you're in the deep end, buddy. Can you swim? And it was challenging.
Yeah.
Luckily, I could write. My math skills were pretty good, but I can just imagine what it would be like for someone who didn't have those skills. They'd be lost.
Yeah, no, it's just tragic. I mean, look, we all know, we hear these stories about kids coming from tough neighborhoods that are the valedictorian in their high school, and then they get to college and they're years behind their peers, right? And they say, what happened? And we feel like we were lying to those kids. They just had no idea.
That's the anomaly.
Yeah. But on the other end of the extreme are kids who, have struggled in school most of their lives. They've not gotten great grades. Their scores have been low. They probably don't love school. And yet we still say, go to college. And it's kids from all social classes. I think this happens in kids who are upper middle class, who for one reason or another just don't like school. But the culture says, well, you should go to school anyways. I've got some folks in my extended family that have had this experience. And I think they really look back and feel like they wasted years that they could have been using to do other things, to get some on-the-job training, to get established, to get some momentum, and to have some success. How demoralizing to, say, okay, you've been really barely keeping your head above water in high school, and now the message is go to college, and then there you go again, and now you're sinking and you fail out. That's not a great way to start your life.
No, it's a pretty big burden, not only from the financial perspective, but also from the emotional perspective, because, frankly, you carry those feelings of failure around for a long period of time, or some people can. What can university presidents do with this? I mean, they want to keep enrollments up, and that's their business model, is enrolling students.
Yeah.
Getting qualified students is sometimes challenging. Some institutions, I know I've done work with one institution that wanted to enroll anybody they could, and I'm sitting there saying, you can't do this. This is going against your catalog. It's going against all your missions requirements. Your accreditors are going to come down and hammer you. And it was a fight.
Yeah.
Because there wasn't the remedial there for students so they could be successful.
Yeah. And I think that's the message. And it's a hard message. I don't know what the right message is for presidents, because the tough message is, look, some of these schools, they do need to shrink their enrollment. Some probably need to close, especially when we're talking about community colleges. If your business model means you have to take kids who are reading at a 6th grade level, then something is wrong with your business model. I think that is just a brutal fact. And look, I think the market's already showing that. I mean, you are seeing that more and more of these people, at least during the pandemic, are saying, forget it, I'm not doing it. And so that's a reality. Again, I don't want to overstate it. I think there are some things that universities can do to try to find talent out there among students who maybe don't look as great on traditional measures, that for a variety of reasons, they don't test grade, or their grades aren't what they need to be, but they can find other ways of seeing that they've got promise to succeed in their programs. By all means, they can try some of those sorts of things. And again, they can look to some of the reform programs at CUNY and others that have tried to support students in those first year classes without putting them in remedial education. And some of that can work, again, especially for kids who are close to the bar, who maybe aren't fully prepared, but are pretty close, having those reading, writing, and mathematics skills. Those are all worth trying as well.
Talk to us about CUNY. That's something I'm not familiar with.
Yeah, I mean, I'm forgetting. Oh, it's called the ASAP program at CUNY, if that rings a bell. It's one of these programs that is trying to say, okay, instead of putting kids in a remedial course where get all kinds of negative effects, the other kids that are there are also low performing. Everybody kind of knows that, oh God, this is the class for kids who aren't ready for college credit yet. Sometimes you don't get the best instructors or instruction. Instead, they say, let's put them in regular freshman courses, but we're going to provide additional support. We really are going to have tutors available. We're going to have social and emotional support stuff available for kids, especially first generation kids, to help them succeed. And they have had some success. That they've really shown there's been some good evidence and some strong studies showing that this approach can work. Again, especially with those kids that are kind of on the bubble. And my understanding is I think they've replicated it in Ohio, in one of the systems in central Ohio, and again, had some success. So there are options out there. I mean, I think almost everybody, agrees that the traditional remedial education model doesn't generally work, but this is one that might be worth trying. I just want to stress, though, it doesn't work for everybody. You got to be close to college ready. You can't be, 3, 4, 5 years away.
How do you determine what college ready is?
Yeah. Well, look, I think, like it or not, test scores are pretty darn predictive of how kids are going to do in college and in other pursuits. They're not perfect. And, of course, we debate this all the time in the context of college admissions, right? And affirmative action and all the rest. But they mean something. And in conjunction with grades, just like that can be a pretty good indication of whether a kid is likely to do quite well in college and therefore should be admitted in a selective college. It can help you understand whether a kid is likely to complete college. The best indication of whether they're going to be good at college is, were they good at high school? And looking at their grades and looking at those test scores. Look, again, there's a whole lot of kids that were not great at high school who are going into college anyways. And by and large, they're not doing well in college once they get there.
Should these folks be taking a gap year or a couple to figure out what it is? Hate to use the term, what they want to do when they grow up.
Yeah. No, I think that certainly makes sense. And I think that can help with some young people and just let them mature a little bit and figure some things out and get some skills. I mean, I think, look, you got to say, for a particular individual, for a particular boy, particular girl, young man, young woman, here's the set of skills they have. Maybe they're not great at the academic stuff, but they've got these other skills that they're really good at and these other interests. How can they start to build on those with the goal of having a family sustaining career, let's say by the time they're 25? And college is one pathway, but it's not the only pathway. And work can be a very good pathway, especially right now with the tight labor market. There's a lot of opportunities out there. Every survey always says that people feel like they learn so much once they're on the job working. We've got this society today where there's a lot of young people who they're not doing the after school jobs in high school. They're not doing those summer jobs like a lot of us did back in the day. Just getting some work experience under their belt goes a long, long way. And then as you say, yeah, they figure out, what they're really interested in. And then maybe it makes sense to go back, try to get a technical credential or, go to the community college to get a particular certificate, once they figure that out a bit more.
Mm-hmm. Do you think colleges and universities should be getting into the certificate programs?
For sure. I mean, obviously, the many community colleges are already there. The 4 years, probably some make sense, especially if they're closely related to some of their degree programs. Look, this is a field where there's a bazillion of these things out there, right? And the quality is all over the place. And in my world of K-12, there's a lot of enthusiasm about getting high school kids into the place where they can get these industry recognized credentials. And, we've all learned about, wow, okay, you really got to be mindful of which credentials you're talking about. There's some states where, for example, in our school accountability systems, we're judging high schools by, among other things, how many kids are getting those kinds of credentials. And they're all getting credentials like, CPR training and Microsoft Word credential. And I mean, that's fine, but that's not what people were envisioning that this was going to be,
not so fast.
was not quite what people had in mind. So of course, quality matters. But, and the fundamental issue is who is going to be willing to say we need somebody in the system to be able to talk honestly to kids, again, without demeaning them. We don't want the old tracking stuff of, hey, kid, you're not cut out for this place. And especially those decisions being made based on race or zip code. I mean, of course, is awful. But we can look at a kid's track record, their academic track record, as well as, how they did in extracurriculars, what they like to do, what they care about. A lot of assessments out there that'll measure kids' career aptitudes and try to say, look, looking at you as a whole person, here are some pathways that might make sense. And it's probably going to involve some work experience. It may at some point involve some formal education, but, the formal education doesn't have to come first.
Yeah. Well, one thing that a number of schools are doing right now, when I say schools, I mean colleges, universities, are dual track, enabling high school students to take freshman, sophomore level courses so that when they graduate, they are close to having their associate's or their 2-year degree. I can see a lot of good things with that. It certainly exposes high school students to college level work. Not all of them are capable of doing it. But then you look at it from is that student, are they ready from a maturity perspective to be a junior? Are they ready to graduate from college at 20 and everything that entails?
Yeah, no, good questions. And of course, are these universities and colleges going to really accept all that credit? We've seen it go, once upon a time, they were very willing to accept advanced placement credit until kids were taking 10 AP classes while they were still in high school and showing up ready to be a junior. And the universities realized that wasn't a great business model. We'll see.
It's not as much revenue as they want to get.
Of course not. And the same issue with the dual credit. Now, a lot of states have tried to make sure that the credit does transfer. The maturity issue, look, I don't know. I think, it probably depends on the individual kid. I think there's some reason to believe that kids today are not as mature as in the past in general, that just the way that American parenting is going, that they get to college. And, you hear these reports from college professors all the time that the freshmen just seem younger than they used to. And that's probably going to be exacerbated by this pandemic.
Well, is that because the students are younger, the professors are older?
Yeah, exactly. And it's, and it's funny. It's actually, in many ways, it's very positive. The kids are not engaging in as risky behavior as we did back in the day on many fronts. And that's, yes, really. I mean,
I never would have figured that, Mike.
I'm not saying, I'm saying the royal we. This is not.
The royal, of course. Thank you.
Yes,
of course. At the Naval Academy, we were never exposed to anything like that, of course.
I'm sure. And I'm sorry about the barking in the pad. I guess my dog is disagreeing with me about this. So.
Oh, I would say so. And I heard the police a little while ago coming for you. So if we have to sign off quickly, folks, it's because Mike's been arrested and taken away in handcuffs.
No, it's just one of these DC motorcades going by. That's what happens. That's what happens.
Very good. Well, Mike, this has been very different for a podcast for me because we brought in a lot of different topics to really bring it to focus. What are 3 takeaways that college university presidents and their board should be thinking about with respect to this new crop of kids coming out of high school?
So first of all, this understanding that there are a lot of kids coming out of high school who are nowhere near ready for college. And in fact, that's going to become an even worse problem now with the learning loss that we've seen during the pandemic. And so I think they need to know that, and they need to be willing to set a standard for what it takes to be successful in their institutions, and be willing to tell some young people that, look, this is not going to be a good fit for you. So that would be one. The second is for kids who are on the bubble, who maybe are close to ready, but not quite. And again, it's going to be a lot of these kids with the pandemic, is to look at some evidence-based programs like this one out of CUNY, the CUNY ASAP program, to try to provide extra support to young people as they're taking those freshman courses. And then third, look, I think they really got to think about their business models here. If the model requires trying to convince young people to engage in studies that are not likely to have a high return on investment, which is especially the case for people who aren't going to complete a degree, that is not a good business model. And frankly, those institutions probably deserve to see their time come to a close.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Those are great takeaways. So what's next for you?
Oh my gosh. Well, I am the president of the Thomas B. Fordham Institute, and we have a ton of work ongoing in the world of K-12 education reform. I got a new book out, for example, that's focused on elementary education. But we are also going to continue to be digging in on these questions around high schools. This college for all mentality, it has been very strong at the K-12 level too. And you can see it in high schools. Almost every kid in America spends almost all of their time doing academic, basically college prep courses. And it's just not working. And so one of the things we're going to be really trying to figure out is what's a better model? How can we really take to heart the idea of giving kids multiple pathways starting in high school so they can be successful? And so if they want to go a more technical route or more career-oriented route, they can get some momentum while they're in high school and have some success. And that's the name of the game.
Those are great things to do. I wish you all the best with that. And if there's anything that I can do from my perch, glad to help out.
Great. Thanks so much. I really appreciate you having me on the show.
My pleasure. Thank you, Mike. Take care. Thanks for listening today. And a special thank you to today's special guest, Mike Petrilli, and for his sharing his thoughts on what higher ed institutions can do in the face of declining enrollments. Our next guest is Martha Larson, Energy Manager for Carleton College in Minnesota. You may ask, why is the Energy Manager for a college on this podcast? Well, besides the fact that she has led Carleton into becoming more green and reducing their carbon footprint, when you hear that she's saved Carleton $1 million a year in their energy and operating budget through adopting greener practices, you'll understand why. Until next time.
Changing Higher Ed is a production of The Change Leader, a consultancy committed to transforming higher ed institutions. Find more information about this topic, along with show notes on this episode at changinghighered.com. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe to the show, and we would also value your honest rating and review. Email any questions, comments, or recommendations for topics or guests to podcast@changinghighered.com. Changing Higher Ed is produced and hosted by Dr. Drumm McNaughton, post-production by David L. White.